Welcome to the Amplifyr Podcast. My name is Aidan Hennebry. I'm your host. The Amplifyr Podcast exists at the intersection of marketing, sales, pricing, leadership, entrepreneurship, where we have raw conversations with real people who are deep in the trenches. Today, we're sitting down with my guest, Chris Windsor. Chris is the president of a company called IPI. They do injection molding, but over his career, Chris has worked in all kinds of different roles in sales and marketing and leadership. I've had the good fortune of working with Chris for many of those years, and I can honestly attest that he is one of the smartest, most dedicated, most hardworking guys that I know. This episode is jam-packed full of great information, great ideas, great thoughts, and I know you're going to love it. So without any further ado, let's get into the episode. Chris Windsor, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. Oh, I've dreamt of having you on this episode on this show for quite a while. So yeah. I'm honored to have you here. So, people tuning in who don't know who you are, where you've been, international man of mystery. Do you want to tell us a bit about you? Tell us a bit about your career. Give us some context as to this conversation we're going to have.
Sure. So my name's Chris Windsor, 33 years old. My wife, married. My wife's name is Emily. Got 2 young kids, Jude and Gwen. So basically... currently, depending when this podcast airs, I'm the president of a company called Ingersoll Products, just in transition right now. I have had about a 15-year career in the marketing, business, sales, business leadership space. So I've worked in majority of the building product space for most of my career in B2B. Marketing was kind of where I started and cut my teeth, but over the past 7-8 years, really transitioned to more kind of B2B selling, and working, leading teams, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a pretty interesting start. Like I call it a start of my career. I guess when I look at the timing, it's like, well, it's not the start anymore, even though it feels like it starts and it should be the finish sometimes, I guess, to some degree. But overall, so I got a variety of experience and been in lots of different businesses. As Aidan said, in my as I'm an international man of mystery, I have done a lot of traveling in my career, done a lot of work in the UK and the US and stuff like that. So spent a lot of time traveling in my career and got to figure out the joys and downfalls of traveling for a whole career. And so
no joke. Well, I mean, when you're talking about being at the beginning of your career, I mean, to be 33 years old and to be the president of a company is something that most 33-year-olds can't say that they've done. So that's kind of cool. And I mean, in so many ways, I still feel like you are at the beginning of your career. I imagine some dudes and ladies that are listening to this that are older than 33 might be throwing up a little bit in their mouth. But anyways, like I said, having you on, I'm like, man, even in those short 33 years of life, you've accomplished a lot and learned a lot and certainly taught me a lot, which is why I'm excited to talk to you today. So you mentioned that you started in marketing and kind of transitioned out of that. And, I would say your core was in sales then for quite a while and kind of revenue growth. And now it's continuing revenue growth, but almost on a exactly presidential operational side of things. Can you walk me through that process in your mind? Were there milestones along the way where you were kind of ready to move on to the next discipline, or has it all just been very organic? Was there a grand master plan at any point, or did you just kind of stumble up really well?
Yeah, I would say that would be a good way to define it. And I think most people, honestly, who get in higher level positions, I would say most people kind of stumble into that. There is some level of, you got to have a certain work ethic. You have to have a certain level of, wanting to continue to learn and be ambitious and all those things. But I don't think anybody plans to be, I'm going to be the CEO of something one day, right? And there are those people, but I don't think those people become CEOs of anything.
It reminds me of Gladiator. I'm watching it in half-hour pieces because I can't stay up late and watch a movie anymore. Yeah. I just fall asleep. But Russell Crowe, he's being offered to be the Emperor of Rome, I guess, and he basically is nope, no way I can do that. And I don't know the actor's name, but he plays Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies. But he's that's exactly why you should be the guy, because you don't want to do it and you don't think that you can, and that's why you should. So I agree with what you're saying about people that maybe set out to be like, I want to be the CEO or something, versus people that stumble upward into it, right?
Yeah, so there was never like a grand master plan of I want to, run a company. There was actually a period of my time, like within the first kind of maybe 3 or 4 years of my career, when I actually said I didn't want to do that.
Really?
Which I'm trying to think back to why I said that or thought that at that point. In hindsight, maybe that was a smart thing to think that, because I'm like, you avoid a lot of problems in your personal life and stress-wise. But anyway, so yeah, it has been a kind of just falling into roles and taking opportunities when they kind of present themselves. I was very, very blessed with the first real career that I had and place that I worked. The bosses that I had at that business were incredibly gracious to me. They really took me under their wing. They let me learn and get involved in things that I had no business in getting involved in. Like zero. No knowledge, no value add, just probably too many questions and being a pain in the ass. So I think that was one thing that was very catalytic for me. And without that first experience, I would not be where I am today. And so, from when you're, leading a company and stuff, obviously having good operational knowledge and finance knowledge and that kind of stuff is really important. Marketing people don't have that knowledge, right? No. And so it's like, early on, I got really exposed to just how a business works. And I think that just became very foundational for me. So from that point, there was no further, from this point, I'm going to plan to now be super successful because of, what I've learned. But it was more when opportunities came up, I said yes to things almost every time. And so I think there is something about just saying yes to something, to say, hey, this sounds interesting and there's an opportunity for me to grow, for me to learn stuff, and not getting so worked up about, well, can I do this? If somebody's giving me the chance to do it, they think I can. So maybe I should just do it and see what happens.
Well, it's funny that you say that and you mark that as kind of, an early milestone in your career, because that was very much I had a very similar experience, and that came with working with you. So for anyone listening who doesn't know, Chris and I have worked together for, collectively like 6-7 years, something like that. 6-7. Yeah. My kids would be so proud.
Yeah.
And in a couple different environments, and then obviously off to the side as well. And so the first time though that you had reached out to me, so I shot your wedding, which was fun. I was a wedding photographer at the time, and you would reach out to me because you had gotten a job, and you were kind of like, we need some photos. I know, Aidan, you mostly do weddings and portraits and stuff, but like, would product photography be something you're interested in? And my first gut reaction was to say no. But I was a broke college kid. I was I don't know if Leanne and I were engaged at that point, but we at least had the intention to get married. And it was my wife who pushed me to say, like, you're broke, I'm going to marry you, and you have a bunch of debt. It would be good if you had some ambition towards paying that off in good time. And so she really pushed me to say, hey, that could be a good financial opportunity. You should say yes to that. And so I remember I came to the plant and auditioned, if you will, and took some photos and kind of proved that I at least had some ability or competency to do the work that I would then be paid to do.
Well, remember we had to do that white backdrop, and then we had, because these were like 2,000-3,000 pound pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
And then we had to walk with our socks on the
violating every OSHA rule ever
on the white to make sure that it didn't get on the scuff marks on it.
Oh yeah, shooting on white seamless is not that big of a deal, but the way that we did it, which was super budget and DIY, was suboptimal. When you have to get like a forklift to lift the machines into it's very difficult.
We had to Photoshop the tire marks from the forklift. Oh my gosh,
so many hours. That was long before the days of AI when you just, tell it. You just type in, please clean this up, and it does it all for you, right? But yeah, so that willingness to say yes to something that I'm like, I don't really know that I'm ready for this, but I'll kind of figure it out as I go. And I think that, I'm grateful when I look back at my life that you were someone that, as you're saying, someone took a chance on you and kind of gave you an opportunity to do something that you were frankly not qualified to do. I feel that way about you and you giving me those career things. So, I mean, I'll put you on the spot here and ask, has there been anything that you can put on record that you turned down, that you're like, what if about? Or have you truly felt like you've kind of seized the day? And maybe, even speaking to people who either find themselves at a crossroads of saying yes to something that they don't feel ready for or qualified to do, or people that have missed the boat and maybe said no to something that they regret. Do you have anything to kind of speak to that from your experience of maybe being on either side of that decision?
Yeah, like I can't think of anything specific that I've really said no to officially. Like, I think by decisions I've made, I have said no to things that probably were going to be asked of me, and like knowingly so.
Yep.
So I think the big thing is, one, when you're looking at opportunities and looking at kind of what's in front of you and whether you're going to say yes or no, I think it's important to understand, like, what's the motivation of my answer. So if I'm going to say yes to this, why? And if I'm going to say no to it, why? A lot of the reason people say no to things is because they're afraid of not being able to do it, or they might not just have a fantastic work ethic and want to put the time into doing it. Like, they might have other priorities outside of work that they say, well, that's more important, and this is going to take away from that. Like, when I said yes to opportunities that required a lot of travel, right? Yes, there were benefits to why the result of saying yes to that, but there are also big costs to that too, right? From a family standpoint. And so I think it's also important when you're saying yes to something, you also have to really count the costs of what that means, as well as the benefits, because it is easy to say, saying yes to everything is amazing. Well, it's like, well, no. Sometimes saying no is the right decision. So it's not yes or no is necessarily the right thing, but it's like, yeah, if you're saying no because you're afraid of what you can do and you don't think you have the skills to do it and that kind of thing, which is frankly what I see most people, that's why they say no to something, because they lack the self-confidence to say yes and say, I'll try it.
One of the things I think too, like, I know there's different organizations out there that have similar leadership principles to this idea about the belief that most things are undoable. So, like, say you make a mistake, especially in business, but in life in general, this is obviously not universally true, but like, if you do something or try something and it really does turn out that you're not well suited to it or not good at it, there's a good chance you can probably walk that back to some degree without tons and tons of negative ramifications, right? Do you feel like that's ever influenced your ability to say yes to something, to kind of be like, oh, well, if I try this and it goes wrong, like, how bad can it really be? Is that ever on your mind?
Not really. Reason being is because I agree with the sentiment of what you're saying, and there are people who are out there like that, but that would indicate that you have a really, really well-adjusted leader.
Okay, unpack this for me.
So if you're going to say yes to something, and you think, well, the worst that's going to happen is I'll fail and I can't do it, and then, it'll be fine, though I'll go back to doing what I was doing before, is that takes a very mature leader to be able to walk somebody through that process, where most people, if they can't do it, they are just crucified, right? And hung out to dry and fired. And I mean, that is the normal way that employees are treated.
I would agree.
So again, and I'm not saying that I even necessarily disagree with that to some regard. Like, if you can't perform, you can't perform. Right. And there is a cost to that. But I also think, like, if it depends on the circumstances of what somebody's asking you to do. And if you're a really good leader, I think you can do a good job at making people feel safe in the change, safe in pushing themselves. Maybe you don't give them the official title at first, but you say, let's explore this a little bit. Right. And so I think, yes, I agree with you. It's important to be able to be in environments where you can take on things and fail safely, but also there's not a lot of those environments that actually exist in reality for people.
All right, I like it.
I've been very fortunate that I have worked at a lot of those environments, but I know that that's not true for a lot of people.
That's totally fair. I think top to bottom would pretty much agree with what you're saying. Do you feel like that maybe then that kind of almost lack of undoability, has that played into the seriousness with which you consider some of these options? Like, is that debilitating for you or motivating for you? Because I think a lot of people, as you're I think you were saying before, get so hung up on that and get nervous and scared, in addition to, all the additional workload or what other things, what other implications are coming as a result of saying yes to this. But like that undoability, is that on your radar as you're making decisions or saying yes to things that you don't know you're qualified for?
I would say absolutely yes and totally no. So in different seasons of my life, I think I have felt those things I felt polarizing opposites of that feeling. So there's been lots of things I've said yes to that my attitude was, I'll figure out a way to do this. Doesn't matter. This is fine. It does, whatever problem I encounter, I'm going to deal with. Not that it's going to be perfect, but I believe that I can do whatever is going to come at me and it'll be fine. And that's a super, super empowering place to live.
Yeah.
But I've also been in the thing of saying, oh my gosh, I made this decision and I don't know if I can actually do this. And I've made a decision that has lasting consequences and potential upside, right? But but you don't know what it is at the time. So I've felt both of those things. So, and I think the difference is that some people will give up or shy away from hard things because they have that voice in their head.
So you're saying that you, as someone who has said yes to a lot of things, and again, I'm exaggerating, was stumbled up really well. You are saying that you are not, you still have that voice that goes, oh, I don't know if I can actually do this, but you've found a way to suppress it or overcome it. Is that fair to say? So I guess my next question kind of in and around that as well is like, I know because, again, you've been a really great and vulnerable leader in the times that I've worked with you formally, where you have shared some of the depths of, even I remember one time with a group of us, you had shared like just a journal entry you had written, which I don't think you journal a whole lot, but I remember you in a particular moment of heaviness and despair saying, at my core, I'm afraid right now that I'm not good enough and that I don't have what it takes and what have you. How do you, when you're in that place, start to climb out of that? Because again, especially I'm thinking of the people listening to this that maybe they have gotten as far as saying, okay, I should say yes to this opportunity, but then they do feel flooded, whether that's because they don't have appropriate leadership or they just don't have the skill set framework themselves, any number of reasons, right? How do you start to climb out of that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges that when you get into senior leadership of any kind, that what you don't hear about is how lonely it is. Mm-hmm. What you don't hear about is how you have very few people who you can actually process with. And so a lot of times, right, if you're in that position as an individual contributor, and if you do have a good boss, or there's people to encourage you and walk beside you and that kind of relationship. When you're in leadership, you don't really have that. So it is weird. I honestly think, frankly, this is where kind of the self-reliance really needs to, you have to find that in yourself. So I think it's twofold. One, being able to be your own therapist to some degree and walk yourself through why am I feeling these things, really have good understanding of why you feel the things you do. The other thing I think is just a bit of tenacity sometimes to say, I don't really care how I feel today. I know that things have to get done, and I know that if I choose not to do the things that are needed, that I have these people who are going to suffer in the business that I'm responsible for. So I think there's those times where it's not solved for me. Like, I'll go through a day thinking, what in the world, am I doing? Is this the right thing? Is this going to work? I have no idea. But you have 30 other people around the table who are like, what are we doing? Right? And you have to not just tell them what you're doing, but you have to be able to encourage them to make good decisions, to lead, to do the right things when you're not there. And you have to do that in the midst of struggling to say, do I really know what to do?
It feels a little bit like, at least my experience of being a parent, right? Like mom and dad, if you're listening, please don't be offended. As you become a parent yourself and an adult, you kind of realize, oh, my parents are just people stumbling around like I am. And they definitely are further ahead than a child is. But as that child matures into an adult, and certainly a young adult in the beginning, but further and further an adult, you start to see like, oh, they are also not that different from me, right? And so I would imagine that leadership can be a similar way, maybe as you continue to climb. I've always thought of it, if we think of an org chart in a pyramid, that naturally the higher up a pyramid you go, there are fewer and fewer people at every level, as is just the nature of most organizations anyways. And so it makes sense that if you're going to share with someone at an equivalent level or higher than you, that the higher you climb, there are just fewer and fewer people with which to do that, which I think is then absolutely kind of what you're saying, right? Really interesting how much of that needs to then come from within you and not be dependent on the people around you, right? And you kind of touched on an interesting thing here that was one of the things that I wanted to pick your brain about, because you've shared this similar thought with me, and it's been so profound and impacting. And I think it's one of the unique strengths that you have. So I want to steal as much of your knowledge as I can in this episode and share it with our listeners. You and I know one of the times we've grabbed lunch in the past couple months or years or whatever, we are talking about how leaders need to make decisions firmly and at least somewhat confidently without 100% of the information required or the facts or what have you to make that decision. And we talked a bit about how I think, if I'm quoting you correctly, you had said that around 70% confidence in a decision is often where leaders live and have to make decisions. And then you and I had talked about the inherent costs that come with the difference between 70% confidence and 90% confidence, and that to go from 70 to 90 is often far more costly, whether that's literal money or just time, effort, resources, what have you, than it is to go from 0 to 70. So I'm curious if you can just kind of speak to that in general, because I have found that such a profound thought. And again, I think it's a unique skill set that I've personally witnessed of you in leadership, is your ability, and I can say from, some of the people that I've worked with, that have worked under you, that people have found it super empowering when they've been under your leadership, that you are able to sort out so many difficult decisions pretty quickly with 70% information, make a decision, commit to it. And more often than not, it was the right decision. So can you just unpack that for me? How does one get there?
Yeah, I think a lot of, well, I think first to talk about the difference between 70, 80, and 90, 100, whatever analogy you want to use, is that the reality is in business and in life, we're often operating without every piece of data that we could use to make a decision.
Yep.
Right? We don't have all the data points for everything. And that is almost true about everything. Right. And so when you're fixated on needing every single data point to make a decision, what's really behind that is how you relate to risk. Mm-hmm. So when you relate to risk in a way that's not healthy, and you can't take risk, you don't want to own your mistakes, you don't want to ultimately be the one who owns a decision, you feel like you have to put all the data points, or as much as possible in data points, in the background, so that if your decision goes wrong, that then you have all this data to say, well, here's why I made that decision, and almost be able to justify it away, right? And I think the other thing is, and I don't know if you and Tim were maybe talking about this, just the whole thing that people say, well, I don't want to take a risk, I could just do nothing now. Well, doing nothing is also a risk, right? And so people evaluate risk wrong. And so I think that's the other thing, is that when you're looking at a decision, to say, I have this much information, what is the risk of this decision right now? I think a lot of people overplay how much risk is involved in a lot of decisions, right? So, and then there's a cost to the time it takes to make a decision, in terms of, you can talk about this, speed to market with a product. You can talk about this about a pricing strategy, about a marketing strategy, right? All these things that you don't have all the information for. So, I think the way I look at decisions is, partly I'm somewhat impulsive as a person, which is helpful sometimes in these situations, because I don't get kind of uppity about having all the data points. Just that's how I'm wired. I don't feel like I need to have everything explained and clear. For me, it's, do I know what's important and do I understand the risk? If we're talking about, a legal issue where I'm risking $1 million of legal bills, okay, well, I'm going to get more data points than if I'm talking about, do we want to go to this trade show or not?
Yeah.
Right? Those are two very different decisions. And so I think that's where you have to apply different risk tolerances and calculations to the type of decision that you're looking at. So and then also what the opportunity is, right? So I think walking through like a risk assessment for decisions is really helpful to say, well, if I choose this and this goes in these 3 directions, what could potentially happen? Okay, I'm going to launch a new product. What's the worst that can happen? I spend $500,000 and I don't sell any. Yeah, okay, that's bad. What's the likelihood that's going to happen? Okay, well, I have these 2 or 3 paths to market. If this doesn't work, I can go here. If that doesn't work, I can go here. Okay, I'm comfortable with that thought process, right? But even I had this conversation with our CEO recently, where actually this was like probably 8 months ago, not recently, where I just talked about, we're at a point where it's like doing nothing is a risk. Doing this is also a risk. I can't quantify the risk of doing nothing as much as I can quantify the risk of doing something. All I know is, and you agree, that doing nothing is a risk, and it's probably even more than doing this. Right? And so I think once you really kind of get on board with understanding the risk assessment, then you can go about making decisions in a different way.
I like that. And what you were saying too about contextualizing that risk, right? Okay, if it's about attending a trade show or not, you can almost literally just assign a dollar value to that to say, if this is a complete sham and a waste of our time and money, here's how much it's going to cost us, right? But as you're saying, in a legal battle, when the ramifications could be massive and you have no real way to gauge or predict what the total damage in, again, especially dollars, but even time, personnel, trust, rapport, all those different things, that will necessitate having a different level of confidence when making that decision, right? I just, it's always been impressive to me the way that you've been able to get it right more often than not. And I like what you're saying about, and maybe you're just really good at doing this without making it obvious that this is what you're doing, but having also those backup plans in place, right? Okay, so let's aim for this. What was that stupid saying you saw in public school? Shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land among the stars, right? But as cheesy as that is, the concept there, or the core idea at least, has some value, right? Aim high, have some sort of backup plan, and if you have to depend on your backup plan, there's probably, it's better than landing absolutely nowhere, right?
Yeah, I think too, the other thing is that we look at decisions and we evaluate risk based on the result.
Okay, talk to me about that.
So there's a book that I read, I can't remember the name of it, but basically it was about this woman who was a professional poker player, right? Okay. And she was that, and she's now a consultant and does business stuff. But basically the concept she talks about is there's something in poker they call resulting. So resulting is basically, I played a 2-7 offsuit, which is a bad hand in poker. Yeah. And I got a full house and I beat somebody who had pocket aces that statistically should win. Resulting is saying, well, I made the right decision to play 2-7 offsuited. And what she says is basically, no, you cannot gauge the quality of the decision you made based on the result that you happen to have this time. So I think that looking at risk needs to go to your process. If you have a good process around implementation, around planning, around thinking, around project management, all these different types of things, then you also can say, I'm confident in the process that I have. So therefore, the risk is a lot less because I know that even if it doesn't work, I went through the right process to get it. When you say, well, what's the risk of me being not paying enough attention to what the market's doing and not understanding market pricing before I launch a product that I have to spend $1 million for? Okay, that's your risk assessment is kind of out the window at that point, because you're just not following a good process of being diligent in what you're doing. So, but I just think it's like when you're confident in, I understand what the right process is. I understand how to mitigate risk by doing things in the right way and to the right level. Therefore, even if the result is bad, I can be confident that I went through the right process, which goes back to that whole concept of resulting. I may have done everything right, even though it didn't work. So the next time that I have something that I have to evaluate, I can't say, well, it didn't work last time. I can say that didn't work, but I know I went through the right process.
That is so profound. I need to chat with you weekly.
It's called Thinking in Bets. That's what it's called.
Was that the woman who there's a movie about her, right? Like, I feel like
I don't know if there is. I want to see it. I haven't seen it.
There's a movie about a professional gamer. It was a woman, you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't think of the name of it. I've watched it now years ago. But anywho, I'm guessing it was the same because I think that movie's based on a book that she wrote.
Oh, cool.
But that's, man, just what a profound thought about the fact that, you know, and I mean, obviously, it's just kind of the way you're framing it. But like, that we can look at a successful result and go, yep, I did everything right. But in reality, like you said, you might have actually played a 2-7 against pocket aces, right?
Yes.
And if you're patting yourself on the back for that, that's a very dangerous thing to do, as you've said, because your process is actually working against you and you're completely unaware of it. Mm-hmm. And that is, at least in theory, eventually going to come back and bite you, right? There was, I can't remember one of the people that we've worked with in the past. I can't remember specifically what the quote was, but something about like, if you don't know why you're in the black, then what is the quote?
John Locke.
It's John Locke.
If you don't know why you're green, you'll never know why you were red.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, if you don't know why you're successful, you're never gonna know why you're failing.
And I think that this idea of resulting at least speaks to me in that context, right? Of like, if you don't actually comprehend why you were successful and what led you there, you are not likely to be able to repeat that again, right? And that, I know, again, even one of the truths about sales and marketing in particular that you taught me is just like, there's nothing random in marketing. Like, everything, if you do it right, you should be tracking it. There should be strategy. You should be able to explain it and connect the dots from A to B to C to D about what you were doing and why, right? There's as you know, I'm a big F1 guy, and there's one of the teams, Mercedes, their team principal, who's also the CEO of the company, really cool guy. His name is Toto Wolff, and he talked one time. He's like billionaire, super powerful, like could just hire or fire anyone, right? And most people in that paddock would just be thrilled to work for him and his team. But he talked about how when his team, which has won countless championships, when they fail at something, he said, we always focus on process, not the person. And I thought that was such a profound thought. And I really appreciate it from a dude who was so powerful, not to just like, you know, feed the stereotype that when you're rich and powerful, you just hate people and demean people all the time. But I just thought that was such a really healthy way to look at it, is to say like, okay, yes, at the end of the day, probably a person was behind this somewhere along the line. And true as that may be, what was the process that likely was underdeveloped that person was following that led them to this? And I think that focusing then on making sure that your process is right, before just blaming people and assuming that, oh, okay, fire that guy, get someone new in. I've never been able to shake that thought, because I thought that we don't do that often enough. Look at processes as opposed to resulting. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, that is why businesses moving to different levels of revenue and size, often they struggle with resulting, right? So when you're a $4 or $5 million company, and then you're becoming a $10-15 million company, right? There's a lot of pushback on when people are like, yeah, but we did it this way and we were successful. Yes, that is true. It doesn't mean that it was right, and it doesn't mean, and maybe it was right, but it doesn't mean it's still right today, right? And so I think that is, and I've seen it from lots of different sizes of businesses all together, is that business leaders result all the time. They don't critically look at, did we go through the right process? How do we make decisions as a business? How do we evaluate risk? Why did we did this and it didn't work? Was it wrong? What did we miss? Right? There's not that critical thinking to say like, this didn't go well, but I would have made that decision again, or this went well and I wouldn't do that again. Those are really hard things to say.
Absolutely they are. And I think that exactly, there's a reason why most organizations don't do that, because it involves a level of reflection and self-awareness that most human beings don't have, much less business leaders who, again, you're run over by your schedule. We were talking just before we started filming about how it's funny how in this stage of our respective businesses, like you feel like you're super busy and also not busy all at the same time. Like it's both, being aware, exactly as we were saying, right? Being aware of why you are successful and using that as something to lead you towards hopefully repeat success, I think is really, really valuable. The one thing that I find interesting to hear you kind of talking about, the importance of that kind of self-awareness, that reflection, that analyzing and developing frameworks and things is like, or processes rather, is I consider you a very rubber meets the road type of leader, like very practical. Like I said, in the years we've worked together, there was rarely a time I would walk into your office, no matter the size of the problem I had on my plate that I was facing that I needed your help with, that in, between 20 and 45 minutes, I wasn't walking out of there, that the ball is back in my court and I know what I need to go do. And now I'm equipped and more confident to go out and tackle it. I consider that very practical, your leadership in that regard, because I felt empowered and ready to go. And so what you're saying about developing processes, I think it's interesting. One of my best friends, he is a very, he would say this too, I think, like perfectionistic guy. So he really likes taking his time, getting things really right, considering all the options, optimizing the best that we can with what we have available. And I am much more of, I've coined the term an iterationist. I like just trying something, see what works, double down on what's working, throw out what's not working. And those are just two very different ways of approaching problem solving. But what you're saying about developing processes, I can see that becoming, if someone's not careful, very theoretical, very philosophical, very high level, and not on the ground or rubber meets the road enough. How do you balance those things, and how do you ensure that when you are developing processes and things, that it's always tied to the real world, and you're not also just, hiring consultant after consultant and spending hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars to develop very basic frameworks and ways of doing things?
Yeah, I think it's I think one of the biggest issues that business leaders have, especially as businesses get bigger, is that they are really good at telling themselves the story of their business rather than what's actually going on.
You're the guy that's always talking, never let the facts interrupt a good story.
Is again, that John Locke? That's a John Locke too. Yeah. We're so good at telling ourselves a story about what's going on in our business rather than saying, is that really happening? Why do I believe that's happening? Or why do I believe this isn't happening? And so I think there is and again, as your business scales and it gets bigger and smaller, you have to contextualize this, right? When you have, I work in a smaller business right now, it's easy for me to go around and see and talk to everybody. When you have, I've been a part of businesses where there was hundreds of employees, you can't have that same connection, but you can do the same types of activities. So, for example, I went and I was walking around our warehouse the other day, and one of our shippers said, "Hey, somebody's asked me to do something," and I was like, I don't really know exactly what it is that he's talking about. I don't ship things. I don't count inventory. I understand the concepts, but I don't do it, right? And so I said to him, you know what? I'm not sure, but let me go talk to somebody. Right. And so I went and I went to talk to his boss and somebody else. And I was like, hey, this person's saying this. Does that make sense? And they were like, well, kind of. And then we said, okay, well, what we're asking that person to do is going to take 23 hours. Are we, oh my gosh, really? Yeah. Okay. No, maybe that's not the right decision that we want to make. So I think just being able to finding ways within whatever context you can to stay grounded and connected to what's really going on in your business is really important. But that also, you have to be able to look really critically at yourself and what's happening to be able to interpret that information. Because a lot of people just end up getting super defensive when employees start saying things about like, oh, I don't like this, or this isn't working. And then we just label it as, well, that person's a complainer, which might be true, but complainers often have a good amount of feedback as well. So it's this awkward tension where, yeah, you don't want to live there all the time, but you also really want to make sure that you're understanding what's going on in your business. And people who are doing the job that you think you know everything about, well, they have a good perspective as well. So,
well, I think that's it tucks into some of what you were talking about before about almost giving people jobs that they are not yet equipped to do. Like what you're talking about there, to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds a lot like placing a maybe even slightly more than average level of trust or belief in someone that they might have something valuable to contribute or might have a profound business insight that is going to transform things in one way or another, right? And again, that flies very much in the face of being a dictator or authoritative leader that just barks orders at people and like you said, like that tells themselves the story of their business but doesn't actually get out on the floor in whatever context that is to figure out is what I think happening what is actually happening, right? You did say, and I think it's an interesting kind of question to sit on, is like people can become defensive, particularly if they're dealing with a complainer or someone that asks a lot of questions or has a lot of opinions about how something should be done. Mm-hmm. I don't consider you a defensive person. I consider you super articulate and able to defend your position very well, but I don't consider you defensive. And I guess, is that a conscious thing? How does, someone who maybe struggles to hear feedback or, not take it personally, has there been anything for you that has helped you better appreciate when someone is coming to you with a problem of some kind?
Yeah, well, I think I actually think I am defensive.
Okay.
I as a character trait, and I've had to work over the years to shove my defensiveness down. I think we're all defensive.
Oh, for sure.
It depends on what and what situation and how we, everybody communicates defensiveness differently, right? Some people, cower away. Some people are passive aggressive, right? There's lots of ways that it comes out. So I certainly understand what it means to be defensive because
that's fair.
I have to shove it down a lot. I do think that, yeah, there's a certain group of employee or people that you work with that, they suck a lot of energy out of the business. I break that into two categories. Okay. There are some people who just complain for the sake of complaining and don't want anything to be better, and they're just kind of crotchety, and that's how they are. And I'd say that's a super small percentage of people.
Okay.
And then there's a group of people who are complaining, and their behavior comes across the same as the people who just want to complain, but they actually want to be enlisted in solutions. I'd say that's 98% of people. So I think it is about really understanding, and those people also generally have a lot of influence, which is interesting.
Absolutely.
And so as a business leader, it's about figuring out how to enlist those people and win them over, and also change the narrative that they're telling themselves about stuff, right? Huh. So I think a lot of the time that looks like I've had experiences where there's an operator on the floor, and every time, this person is, always complaining about something or this or that, or we label them as this. But then when you go out and you say like, hey, how's this new process going? And then they say, it's okay, but this. And it's like, man, that's a fantastic comment. I'm glad that somebody brought that up. When you say, you know what, that's interesting, I'm going to think about that. And when that becomes the catalyst for action and you start enlisting that person, it's amazing to see the attitude change that happens. So they shift from, I hate this, everybody's stupid, and nobody listens to what I have to say, to this isn't working, but I know I have people around me who are invested in figuring this out if it makes sense.
I love that. It reminds me, there's a client that I'm doing some work for right now, and one of my recommendations about how to grow his business was to do some available to the public workshops and training things, and it'll all be free of charge. But realistically, my belief is that he could attract the right audience that might eventually turn into clients, right? And even if they don't, there's still value in that workshop. And so the way that I would structure that workshop, which is theoretical right now, but I would do about an hour of teaching and I'd have an hour of Q&A, because I imagine most of the people coming to that particular workshop are going to have a lot of questions, because it's an area where most people are fairly ignorant, but they know that they should be more involved than they are, and they just never really get around to it and whatever. And I was spending time today thinking about how valuable that Q&A session could be to really uncover what are the core issues that plague my audience, and then taking that, and in this particular context, it's taking that and then developing more materials or a better sales process or marketing process or language around solving those issues, right? And I think that, even last week, I did some cold calling, trying to drum up some business, which is something you and I have talked a lot about. And one of the things that you were encouraging me a week or two prior to that, before I done it, is like, Aidan, you will learn very fast what works and what does not. There is almost no quicker, shorter distance between trying something and figuring out if it's successful.
It's free market research.
Then, yeah, absolutely. Then cold calling someone, right? And you were absolutely right. I only made probably 25 cold calls that week, but from the first cold call to the last one, the level of just knowledge I had, not even because I had been wildly successful. I did have some success, but just like the responses I would get, the people that actually did engage with me, and just the little casual comments that they would say helped me to understand, okay, here's how this situation is being perceived, and here's how I can compensate for that and challenge that and get around that in, again, a really effective way, an efficient way, or what have you. But what I'm trying to kind of tie this all back to, in terms of what you're talking about, walking the floor at a factory or what have you, and getting feedback from your employees, is exactly, there is so much good information, talking about data points earlier. There is so much data that you can uncover if your ears and eyes are open and you are thinking in that mind space of like, okay, there is something for me here. Or kind of, I think too, like sometimes even it catches you off guard. And I think that it's probably a skill or a reflex, is something that can be trained and learned, to be able to suddenly realize, oh, that's a really valuable idea, right? I know, at some of the organizations we've worked at, when I've just had meetings with the marketing team, some of the most effective meetings were really long brainstorming sessions, and it's impossible to predict whether it's going to be at 5 minutes into the meeting or 2 hours into the meeting that someone is going to have an idea and they're going to say it out loud. And usually the best ideas are started with like, this might be stupid, but, and then it ends up being brilliant. And I like that, because I think the line between complete idiocy and genius is very thin and very blurry, and so that has kind of trained into me this at least desire, even if I don't successfully always deliver on it, but this desire to always be listening for what great idea or what great concept or great lesson might be hidden in a very casual, offhanded comment or something that someone might make, you know?
Yeah. I think the other thing too is you hear more of these, you start getting tuned into what's important and what's not, right? And so I think you do gain that experience as you go along as well, where you can say, okay, that is just whiny, non-compliant, not helpful. This is super constructive. This person is really invested in what we're doing, and even if I don't agree with it, I need to encourage and walk alongside the feedback so that this person feels heard, because I want to keep them around, because I want to keep, even if this isn't a great idea, I want to keep them enlisted in giving ideas, because that's really important. And ultimately, that's how you grow a business, right? You can't grow it by one person having all the good ideas. You have to enlist everybody to say, how do we look at this different? What could we do? How can we improve this process? We do this today. How could we do it differently?
That's one more thing that, you know, you've kind of, you said it, and I want to highlight it, and I would love to dig into it, because I think it's another immense talent and skill that you really have, which is placing a tremendous amount of trust in the people that report to you to execute well on their job, to be well-intentioned in what they are doing. You know, I know you and Tim have both said, you know, if I believe that this is at their core, fundamentally a good person trying their best to do a good job, even if they are falling short of that, I relate to them in a different way, and I frame the conversation in a different container that will, you know, elicit a different response from me, because I'm going into it with healthier preconceived notions, right? But going back to that, that skill that you have to be able to place a tremendous amount of trust in someone, and to know, like, as you just said, that one person does not a business make, right? That you yourself cannot do this. And, you know, even as we were talking about climbing up the org chart and having fewer people around you, I think, again, by necessity, as you climb the org chart, there are more people under you. And I think that there is a healthy relationship and dependence that must exist if you are going to continue to succeed at whatever level you're at. And I think that, you know, that was even something that I really struggled coming out of a season of self-employment, going back to working a day job, was when I was self-employed, I just did everything myself, right? And I know you really coached me through delegation and giving employees and other people a shot at actually doing some of the work. And that was a real challenge. But it was so empowering to me to have you just like give me something, once again, right? Maybe we're bringing this full circle, something that I was not necessarily qualified to do, but you still, just through your confidence, energized and motivated me to want to make you proud, Dad, and succeed at it, right? But I think there's man, something just so deeply human and intrinsic in that, of just, yeah, wanting to not let people down, of wanting to live up to our potential, but that is so necessary to trust people. And I guess, yeah, that's kind of what I was originally going to say, was like, I've seen leaders that do not delegate well and end up micromanaging things, and usually it kind of makes all things worse, right? And I would love to have you speak to how to delegate better. So if someone is listening to this, whether they're in a position of formal leadership or indirect leadership, again, whether it's at an organization or just in daily life, how does one get better at trusting other people and delegating work? Because from where I stand, and having, you know, been an employee that reported to you, you've done a very, very good job at that. And I would love to understand more of your mindset of how you got there.
I think that delegation, in my mind, is very rooted in like a belief system.
Okay.
So if you believe that you are smarter than everybody, that you have the best ideas, that you have the best work ethic, you have the best ability to deliver on something, that really focuses on how you're going to treat other people, what you're going to give other people, and ultimately what work and how much you trust somebody, right? When I have a belief about myself that says that I'm the only one who can do this, and I have a bit of a hero complex around it. I am going to then do everything essential because I have a belief that that's the only responsible thing for me to do it as a leader for the business that I'm responsible for. So while the intentions are good of this hero complex, it has a big cost to it, because what happens is twofold. One, you do get an overstated perspective of yourself and what you can do, and that you do have the best ideas. And then the other thing is you give people and you delegate work that's not meaningful.
Absolutely.
So then what happens is twofold. One, you get overburdened, right? You get overburdened, you get overworked, you get stressed out eventually. And also your team doesn't feel like they're contributing to anything super meaningful, because they know, they're not stupid, they know that you're giving them work that doesn't have a lot of risk or responsibility value to it. So I think it starts with how do we see people and what do we believe about them. The other thing is like, I think maybe I am wired. I don't have like this. I don't have this like inkling that I need to just be involved in everything. I think I did. As I reflect, I probably did have that inkling in the beginning, but after maybe a few ass kickings from like a few really good people about how you shouldn't do that, I feel like I just kind of was like, I don't need to be involved in everything. Like, but I think it starts with that belief of I don't always have the right decisions. And there's a differentiation between this is right or wrong, or this is my preference, right? That's another big aspect, is that preference. This is a good thing for marketing too, right? In marketing, there's a lot of debate about preference, right?
My gosh.
Not about what's right or wrong.
Absolutely.
There's so many ways, so many right ways to do things in marketing, especially. And it's like, you like this, I like this. Somebody has to make a decision. Sorry, the boss oftentimes gets to make a tiebreaker. That's not wrong. But it's like, it's not that it's right or wrong, right? So I think sometimes as a boss, it's like looking at something objectively saying, I don't know if I would have done it that way, but I can see why they did it this way, and it's not wrong. So therefore, I'm good. I don't need to say anything. I can just accept that what it is. And if it wasn't right, then I'm going to check the results, or I'm going to get told the results, and I'm going to know it wasn't right. Then we can talk about it then. But I don't need to throw up my hands and say, why did you not do this the way I would have done it? Right. But that's where a lot of people, they get into this mindset that, I can't, I'm not going to give people meaningful work because it's too risky.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Like, you allow your preference to be mistaken for right or wrong. And especially, in the marketing world, which is where most of my career has been, like, you get into silly bickerings about things. And that was something that, especially over time, just started to drive me nuts about the marketing field. And again, don't get me wrong, I was, especially in the beginning and maybe throughout my entire career, who knows, but super guilty of allowing my preference to be the thing that I was directing at someone, right? When in reality, it was like, Aidan, it really doesn't matter. Stop caring so much. Get over it, right? I think I eventually got better at that, but, exactly. I think leaders who are not self-aware will fall into the trap of believing that their preference or their desire to see something done a certain way is the only way to do it, or is the optimal way to do it. And then you rob your employees of the ability to do really great work and make meaningful contributions, because they feel like when they have contributed, again, going back to the guy on the floor in shipping, whether that was a complaint or whether that was a genuine, appropriately given contribution of some kind, if they don't feel like it's heard or that they're valued, they will eventually seize up and stop giving those contributions. And I think what a great way to slowly kill your business is to create employees that don't want to contribute because they don't feel like anyone cares if they're there or not.
Well, and I think too, the other thing is that when you delegate, you're not just delegating. Like when you delegate well and meaningful work and within people's context, what you're doing is you're enlisting the minds of your employees rather than just their hands, right? So instead of saying, I need you to do this task, which tasks have to get done. But when you enlist people's their hands and their mind, that is where people really start to become super valuable for the business, where they say, you know what, this person trusted me, or they asked me this question, right? They said to the floor supervisor, why would we take 2 people on this and go twice the speed versus 1 and go half the speed? What's the right decision? Do you understand why we would be asking those questions? And then you get them thinking like, oh my gosh, yeah, that does make total sense, right? So when you start enlisting people into meaningful conversations, you capture the mind share, and that's when they really become valuable to your business. Because yes, tasks need to get done. We all have things we have to do. But when you're enlisting people's thought outside of work, when they're just thinking about stuff, that's when you've really won from a cultural standpoint. And delegation is kind of the thing that does it. When you delegate meaningful things, you get meaningful results from people. How crazy is that? When you don't give people anything meaningful to do, you get people who just sit around and do just what they're expected to do and nothing more. What do we expect is going to happen?
Such a profound truth, and yet like it seems so obvious when you frame it like that, but it's shocking when you are in the trenches how difficult that can be to remember, right? I really like what you're saying about engaging people's minds and how that is really what elevates them. Again, I would say there's 2 benefits. That one is that it just creates a more valuable employee for that organization. But I would say it also, I would think at least there's got to be some statistic out there that would prove this, that it also retains them longer.
Yeah.
Because who doesn't want to work in an environment where you feel like everybody knows your name, that you contribute, that you matter, that if you're sick for a day, that things are going to kind of fall apart a little bit without you. And that, that's not like, again, I really like how most of our conversation has been about not letting your head balloon too big and not letting it get there. But I think that especially, this again is, I feel like I'm sure at some point in our years of working together, we would have talked about this, how I remember at different times when when me and my team, we would do something, complete something, and especially when it had honestly very little involvement from me, but it was more them, and I would commend them, tell them they did a great job, thumbs up, high fives, bought everyone donuts, whatever. But it was different when you, who were, one seniority higher than me in the org chart, but someone that carried a tremendous amount of respect and rapport within the company, when you would come in, you could say the exact same thing. Often you would say less than me. And
well, that's almost all the time.
Well, yeah, it doesn't take much to say less than me. But you would come in, say less than me, and it would have a bigger impact on them. And what I really didn't take offense to that, because I'm like, I understood it, that the power that you held, especially, again, the higher up an org chart you go, and to speak, I hate to say it, but like speak to employees downward that are lower than you, really truly what you do in a roundabout way is you actually draw them closer to you. You raise them in a, some sort of metaphorical org chart sense, because you are creating in them a deeper desire and care. And again, if you want to create a successful organization, what a great way to do that. All of this, though, I think is so funny because it's very paradoxical. So it is counter to what you would think, that in order to be a great leader, if I hear you correctly, at least in a oversimplified way, what you're saying is you don't need to do absolutely everything. You don't need to have all of the answers. You don't even need to be able to answer someone right then and there when they ask you a question. But you need to empower the people around you. You need to depend on them. You need to draw upon them. You need to give them meaningful work and encourage them and give them space to do better work, to be unqualified, and to step up to the plate. And that is paradoxically what makes you a better leader, is almost by giving more work away and giving more responsibility away. And so this idea of paradox within leadership here is something I would love to hear you talk about, because I know that at some point or another, you and Tim have worked on a book about paradoxes, particularly I think in sales, but it would exist as well, obviously, in marketing and leadership and all kinds of places, right? Can you tell me a bit about that, about paradoxes? Like when did that start to become a thing for you, or where was there a particular paradox that you came across that you were really like, there's something in this idea that I should explore and dig into? Like, where does that come from? Because I think that for the people listening, understanding the concept of paradox and how it's not either or, it's a both and, is something that can unlock a lot of value for people.
Yeah, I think it started really coming full circle for me in the sales realm, even though it has a lot of broader implications as well. Sales is a funny thing. It is unlike any other aspect of any business. Yep. Because it's hyperly process driven. It's hyperly, we like to put it in a box because that's really helpful for honing our skills and practicing and this. But then you get out in the real world, and sales is so far from being in a nice little box, because you're dealing with other humans, and you're dealing with competitors who are humans, and you're dealing with people who don't want to do the work to change, not because it's not a good idea, just because they don't get paid to do that, right? So you're dealing with these wide variety of exterior things that you're having to manage. So I think for me, it was this interesting process where at the beginning, I think of my real, when I really started getting into sales leadership and doing a lot of process work and stuff, I wanted things to be more process driven and clean than I think is possible. Now, the really cool part of that was if I didn't go down that road, I never would have developed some really cool processes and ideas and structures that can absolutely be implemented in the real world. But you just have to flex them when you need to, and you have to be knowledgeable enough to say, "Whoa, this is going in a different direction. I got to go over here now because that's not a good place to be." So it is this interesting thing of like, we want to put everything in a box. We want things to really be clean and explainable all the time, but just life isn't like that, right? Decisions aren't like that. Business is not like that. And so it is interesting being able to hold a bunch of things in tension at the same time, and just thinking through like, I agree with you on one hand, but I can also see this perspective. And so the whole thing of just paradoxical thinking in general is being able to hold two seemingly opposite or opposing ideas in both hands at the same time and weighing them. There is just like this interesting skill to being able to sit in that place. And I think that's where, with like the concept of paradoxes, in sales and other things, is just that we don't often sit in that place of, there's these two things that I'm not sure what to do with.
Because both seem true, but they can't both be true.
Correct. Or they both are true. And how do I manage these things? So a great example from a leadership perspective of a paradox would be, I have a person who works for me, who reports to me, who isn't really great at their job, who does the bare minimum, all these things, right? They're a very average to below average performer. Okay, so I can hold that intention. Then I can hold this other thing to say, yeah, but their department is not crazy essential. If I fired them, I'm going to have to pay massive severance, and then I'm going to have to rehire somebody at 50% of the cost of them, and they're a really nice person, and 90% of the time it's not an issue. Okay, I'm going to sit in this place here for a second, right? This hand says fire their butts, and this hand says don't fire them, right? Let them be. And I think it's just sometimes holding like that situation is just a very basic example where sometimes we just have to sit in that place of, there's not a super optimal decision here, but I have to make one.
Well, yeah, because we talked about how not making a decision is making a decision, yes. Right? Yeah.
Well,
and I think it was another, this one might have been a Richard quote, maybe it was a John Locke quote, of that you had told me once about something along the lines of like, don't blow something up until you have a good plan.
Better solution,
yeah. And that's a very powerful thought, because I think especially when you do get into leadership, and especially if it has gone to your head a little bit, you get into this kind of flow state, if you will, of like making lots of decisions and making them quickly. We were talking about 70% decision, right? Okay, great. 70%, you get a 70%. And like, you can absolutely, if you're not being careful, blow things up when you actually have no better plan. Yes. And you are about to make a situation considerably worse than you thought, right? That's not a good thing to do. You should try not to do that. Try not to live in that paradox of being overly excited about one option but not considering the other end of the spectrum, right? And I think sales in particular is so prone to paradox because of the fact that you're dealing with emotional human beings who are being motivated by a million different things that don't fit nicely on a spreadsheet and don't quantify nicely in a sales process, right? And so as much as you're saying, absolutely. And I also would advocate you should have some form of a sale. Everyone has a sales process. It's just about how well defined it is and how well you stick to it and how successful it is. Yeah. But understanding that, yeah, there needs to be a degree of elasticity in there because the people that you are dealing with are not going to always conform very nicely to your process. And so what are you going to do with that, right? You have this rigid process that you want to stick to, fine. But there are going to be times where your hand is going to be forced and you have no choice. So you're just going to like cut out that person from doing business with you, or are you going to find a way to stretch and warp and allow your sales process to be paradoxical so that you can still actually grow the business from time to time?
And I think too, every decision doesn't have to be the same, right? That's the other paradox that's funny about business, is that just because I made this decision last time doesn't mean it's the decision I'll make every time. For the stage of the business. Resulting, right? Well, I got to hold these things in tension, right? I can't just say, well, that's how I make decisions from now on. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I wasn't wrong, but it's different now, right? And so I think being able to have that internal wrestling within yourself of I can hold this, I can hold this, and being able to like wrestle that out within yourself on a daily basis. And I think that is like, again, as a leader, you don't have like a sounding board as much. So it's kind of like I do, and I know a lot of other leaders, like you find yourself like internalizing your own wars where you're like, no, you should do this. We should do this. This is what would work. This is what would work. You're like, no, that's stupid. That's impulsive. You're taking too long, right? So it's like always just really trying to pull yourself back and forth to find like, this is what I should do based on pulling these things into the middle. Now, again, middle is not compromise. Middle is tension point between paradoxes. Not always the middle, but it's somewhere in between.
Do you use AI tools to help you solve some of those things when you don't have? I do this a lot, so this is like you could just say no to this question, but like as you climb higher, and I find this a lot in my business, like the way that I use AI is way often like write this email for me or make this social media post, and I use it a lot for I'm wrestling through this decision I need to make, or this direction I need to take, or what an appropriate response to this given situation would be. And, does that align with my values and goals, or where I'm trying to take my company or whatever. So I depend on AI quite a bit in that regard, really just as a brainstorming tool. And it's interesting, especially because I was a ChatGPT guy for a long time. Then I started experimenting with Gemini, and they are very different in the way that they formulate responses and the way they interact with you, talk to you, if you will. And when I have a particularly difficult situation, I'll pit them against each other, and I'll just copy and paste the same prompt into both. And then it's just interesting to see who I end up kind of falling down the rabbit hole with, based on kind of what makes more sense. And then sometimes I'll even say, oh, well, I asked ChatGPT and she said that. I don't know why it's a she, but it's a she. She said this, and then Gemini said that. And, again, kind of even having them almost fight with each other to go, well, I see some value in that, but here's why I would stick closer to my original thing. So I'm curious, is AI something that you use in that, or is it just like it's the Chris Windsor AI machine in your brain and that's all you got?
I do at certain points. I don't use it for a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Like
actual decisions?
No, not actual decisions. Like oh my goodness, like ethereal thinking.
Okay.
Right? Like it's like I don't use it for a lot of like moral quandaries and value stuff.
Yeah.
I use it more data based.
Okay.
So, and again, a lot of when I'm assessing a decision and risk, most of the time I'm trying to put data towards it.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's like, again, return on investment. This project's going to cost this, and I believe I can generate this much profit from that project. How many years of payoff is that? Well, I know based on if it's within this time range, it's probably a good decision. Now, what's the risk? I might be wrong on my sales projection. I might be wrong on my capital projections. My timeline might be off. Okay, I understand those things. I know how to manage those things. So I don't use it for like, yeah.
Not quite in that way.
Not quite in that way.
That's fair.
Yeah. Maybe I should, but I don't. Yeah.
I mean, try it once, see what happens. It's interesting.
I have done it.
For sure.
But it's like it's certainly not a regular basis.
Well, I was just more like, that's someone that's not your wife that you could bounce ideas off of that also doesn't work at your organization, that could give you some pretty good, at times anyways, good feedback or sense of direction. And that's where, again, like, I use it very much at like the brainstorming level, and sometimes I'll follow its recommendations, but it to me, I'm more looking for just like almost another voice to help kind of clarify or provide a perspective on my thinking, as opposed to just like, help me, what should I do, make a decision for me, right? Yeah. I'm curious, so, you know, as we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, you've stepped into a new role. I say new, but functionally, I think you've been doing this for a while, but a new role as president anyways. And again, you know, at the beginning of the conversation, we talked a lot about being unqualified for things and stepping into them and being given opportunities and learning fast and growing fast and so on. And I'm just curious to know, what is something that you have been learning or you expect to learn or you feel like is an area of growth, or however you want to answer it, of this stage in your life? Again, I think the resulting thing in particular was such a fascinating concept to really dig into, about how we overestimate the results that we get and over attribute at times our success to things that we did, as opposed to the luck of the poker table, right? But I'm curious if there's been any other really interesting or you know, tension or paradoxical lesson that you've been learning in this season of life in leadership as a president.
Yeah, I think I might go kind of more personal.
Sure,
on
do it.
Because I think it's in the last season, I really feel like I have been reminded that, and I've known this and talked about it from a leadership perspective before, but just the person that I am outside of work is also the person that is at work, and being really cognizant of what you're doing and what your sleep schedules are and how you're managing your energy as a person affects what you can do at work. And so I think that's been a big thing that I've been working through and learning to say, like, for so many years, I just, in hindsight, I just kind of ran ragged a little bit, and I burned the candle at both ends. I didn't sleep well for years. I didn't sleep a lot. I was probably operating on, 4.5 to 5.5 hours of sleep for 8 years, right? Wow. And that's, we know scientifically that's not healthy.
Not good.
But I just feel like when I was in that season of really kind of like, working a lot, traveling a lot, not sleeping well, probably drinking too much and having too many good times and habits like that, I just feel like in this season I've realized, like, there's a cost to be paid for that at some point, right? And you can't sustain that forever. And so I've just been learning more and more recently just around how to manage my energy better in my personal life, in order to be the best that I need to be from a work perspective. Because there's lots of people who depend on me, my boss, our shareholders, the people who work for me. They depend on me to be at the top of my game. And so that comes from a personal standpoint. If I got to be on the top of my game from a personal standpoint, if I'm going to do that at work for 10 hours a day, right? I still do kind of like to wake up early in the morning. So if I want to wake up at 5 o'clock every morning and go to work, well, I better get
5 o'clock. That's like sleeping in
for
you.
I know. But this, the thing is I've gotten, part of it's getting a bit older. Part of it is I think I'm paying for so many years of neglect now. I can't do what I used to do. So now how do I manage my energy differently now?
Yep.
Right. So that is a big thing. And I haven't learned it. I'm learning it. I'm figuring it out.
I like that. Well, I mean, what I hear you saying is you're thinking with sustainability in mind, yes. Right? That you feel, again, if I'm hearing you correctly, you've gotten out of a bit of that like really intense go period. And so now you're looking at, okay, especially as I settle into this new role, new season of life and what have you, how do I orchestrate things to be sustainable, right? And I mean, that just tucks in super nicely into the entire conversation we've been having around true, deep, effective leadership, right? And challenging yourself and not just defaulting to being a micromanager or thinking that you have the best ideas, and holding those paradoxes and things, right? Of now really just being like, okay, how do I optimize myself and my life outside of work so that what I contribute to work is the best that it can possibly be? I remember you were definitely one of the first people. This would have been early in my people management career. The person that shared the idea with me of like, Aidan, you manage a team, and the team that you manage, like that person is not just your work employee, they are a whole person. And chances are, if they have baggage in their personal life, it's coming with them to work. And don't think that most people can compartmentalize that well. And it's healthier and more appropriate and probably beneficial long term to view them as a whole person, and to, I mean, even just love and respect and treat them and manage them in a certain way that is going to try to draw out the best in them, while again holding the paradox of, so on that hand, you want to draw out the best of them that you can, but you also need to keep in tension that they are a flawed human being just like you are, and both of those things can be true and have to be true and coexist with each other, right? So it's encouraging, I guess, to hear you talking about sustainability, and I think that will be cool to check in with you in 3 to 5 years, just to say like, or just to see what great things emerged from being really aware of that, right? I think I would imagine, I think a huge part of that is around travel specifically, right? Your career has always been unique to me in that you, again, especially kind of as you teetered more into the sales side of things, but even just as you were in more just direct leadership as opposed to simply sales, you did a lot of traveling. You were on the road a lot, and I imagine with a young family that was quite a challenge at times. And I remember when you stepped into this new role at IPI, that it was one of the things I feel like you shared with me was a benefit immediately, was how you, in this new season of life where you were not traveling anywhere near as much, that you'd very quickly felt the benefits of that, not only for yourself personally. And I'll admit that I was impressed and kind of shocked and surprised when I heard you say how much you didn't miss traveling, because I definitely, in full transparency, my perspective of you is like, oh, this guy like kind of says he doesn't like traveling, but I think in reality he actually likes traveling. And again, I know too from the little bit that I've been out on the road, there are benefits.
It's the paradox of traveling.
We'll leave it at that. I love that.
And anybody who's traveled regularly understands the paradox of travel.
The paradox of travel is that when you're at home, you want to be traveling, and when you're traveling, you want to be at home. That's really what the paradox of traveling is. But I loved that. That was such an encouraging thing for me to realize, oh, I was wrong, that Chris actually, he's home more. And that is not only really beneficial for him as a person, I think it was really beneficial, as far as I heard, to your marriage, and especially to being a father, right? So that's such a cool thing. And yet again, another thing, kind of going back to self-aware leadership, that sustainability is probably something that if you're not being intentional about how do I be sustainable in this, you're likely not to find balance in sustainability, right? You're probably going to exactly burn the candle at both ends and wear yourself out if you're not conscious of that, right? Has there been a specific practice or anything other than not being on the road as much that you have found that has made you kind of feel more sustained into the future?
Not really. No, honestly.
You tried cycling and that went a certain way.
Yeah, I did. Exercise is good. Don't break your back doing it though. I don't recommend that.
Fracture some vertebrae.
Yeah, and break my sternum, and so But I think my answer would be no, and I think it's partly because I'm figuring it out, and I think I am I'm paying the cost for decisions I've made, right? And so those don't get undone in a day, right? And so I think that's important. But going back to that whole, even just the mindset thing that we talked about from the beginning, just around like, I have a belief that, I know the process to getting to a more sustainable place. So even though I don't feel like I've seen the
fruits of the labor yet.
Effects of those processes, maybe. I know that those processes, because of science, because of this, because of that, I know good sleep is good for you. Even though maybe I don't feel as rested as I thought I should.
Yep.
Well, I know that doesn't mean I should sleep less because of that, right? Yep. So going back to, the process and resulting, right? Same thing.
Yep.
What is the process? What are the things that I want to invest in because I know they're good for me, and I need to make sure that I follow through on that.
Yep. How do you disagree with that, right? As we slowly start to land the plane here, I'm thinking of the beginning of our conversation when you volunteered your age. So being a 33-year-old, president of a company, having the career that you've had so far, as I was preparing for this conversation, I was like, man, I wonder in 5 to 10 years, and I especially want to anchor on the 10-year side of things, where is Chris Windsor going to be? And I don't necessarily mean what company do you think you're going to work for or anything like that, but whether that's at a broad level in leadership, or if it is dipping your toes back in sales, or if it's leaving the corporate world behind and traveling North America in an RV or what have you. Like in 10 years, I guess, especially on the professional side of things, where do you feel like you might be? Do you have a prediction? If we're playing poker here, if you had to wager a bet on where you might be in 10 years, can you even just think of things that you have not yet experienced in the business world that you desire to, or that, again, I'm thinking back to the beginning of our conversation when you were talking about being invited into things that you were not qualified for, that you had no business being a part of. Are there things that you have not been invited into yet that you're like, man, that would be cool to try that? Or just like, if I won the lottery, yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yeah. I think that when I read this, because you sent me some of the questions beforehand, or the discussion thing, and I read it and I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to answer this question. Partly because I'm not a kind of a long-term goal guy. And I've thought about like why that is. And part of me is like, I've tried to write 3-year goal or this goal, or
I've
whatever,
read some of them.
Even a part of being a business. And I just realized that like things change so much that those are never really that relevant unless they're super, super, super high level. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like
very vague.
Yeah. Part of me, I'm like, well, I don't know how much energy I want to put into that. But I would say in 10 years, what I would love to be doing at some point is I would love to be involved in multiple different types of businesses, I think. So like I would love to, for example, I would love to, potentially be an owner in a number of different businesses and get to work in those businesses and helping those business leaders, figure out what to do and help them along and that kind of stuff. Like, I think that would be really cool. The other thing is I think I have a fairly high capacity for work. Uh-huh. And so I can do a lot not being a full-time employee somewhere. So I think I can add a lot of value, kind of doing a variety of different things. So that kind of sounds interesting to me, to just I love different things.
Is that different, like industries in particular? Is that across the globe? Like, do you anything particular, or just like try lots of different things?
Not even try lots of different things, just like different people, different circumstances, different issues and problems, right? Like I love problems. I find problems so interesting and fun. Like give me something that's blowing up and let me go in and be like, hey, can I help you fix, like, how do we do this, right? I love problems. They're interesting to me. So I just feel like, oh, it'd be cool to be able to go into lots of businesses that like have crazy problems. And I'm like, oh, cool, let's fix this.
So is that more like a consultant like
No.
Tim, or is
No.
that more like a John and Richard of like,
Yeah.
just being more actually involved?
No, I want to
or
have
ownership stakes,
Yeah.
or whatever, however you look at it.
And when I say like I want to have stake, like, yeah, maybe ownership stake, maybe not. But like when I say stake, I mean more like I want to have responsibility.
Yeah, skin in the game.
I don't want to just be a grand suggester of things, right? And that there's a time and a place for a consultant and an outside perspective, but that's not, as of today, that's not how I like to get involved. So yeah, I don't know, it'd just be interesting to get involved in a bunch of different things.
I like it. Well, I mean, if I'm remembering some of Richard's career correctly, I think that feels similar in that Richard was, yet again another young leader that was thrown into crazy leadership opportunities, and a dude that, in my short years working under his leadership, I was always just blown away at how much, one time I think he just laid out his career for me, and I was just shocked and awed at like how much he had done. And I was like, man, I could never be like that guy. But, this almost reminds me of maybe one last kind of thing that I know that we've talked about in different contexts of leadership, of how really great leaders, in doing their work, if really effective leaders don't make the people below them say, wow, that guy is so talented and so unique that I could never do that. But a great leader will cause someone to say, wow, if he can do it, so can I. And I think that is maybe a real nice way to summarize the way that I view how you've been as a leader, because I do think you are just, you have God-given talents and dispositions and things as well. But I see the way that you combine that, and I certainly don't want to do a disservice to the hard work and the skill and things that you have gained through, again, all the different things we talked about today, right? Delegation and trusting people, and not letting your head balloon too big. But I think that's maybe, just one more way to summarize something you've done really, really well as a leader.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Chris, man, I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours more. This has been so good. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate it. Let's check in like 9 months to a year, and we'll do a follow-up.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
And that's been our episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe to the Amplifyr Podcast on your favorite streaming platform. Give me a shout at Aidan at amplifyr.ca if you'd like to consider being on the show. And until then, we'll catch you in the next one.